Bless you all. May your pain and problem find its way to Christ. May you find rest in the Son. May you witness and behold how God heals and does the impossible. Today we have two Bible passages, but they tell the same story. In Samuel 1, chapter 22, we see David on the run, hiding, and being a powerless refugee. Saul realized that he was about to be replaced by David, that God now intends to take the throne from him and give to David, while David was a innocent, loyal general, military general of Israel. But because Saul wanted to keep the throne for himself, he basically tried to kill David. Now David was on the run, and he had nothing. When he was about to leave, he got a sword of Goliath on his way out, because that was the only thing he could take. But that didn't really work out. People knew the sword of Goliath, and when, what was his name? King Akim of, I forgot the name, sorry. When the outsiders recognized the sword, the famous sword of the giant Goliath, they recognized that this is David, and they captured him. David, afraid of losing his life, he had to pretend that he went mad. He's the crazy person. He had to drool on his beard and rub himself on the gates and walls. He had to humiliate himself just to survive. And after that, he went on the run, and he arrived in the cave of Adullam, which we see in verse 1 of today's passage. Alone and on the run, and with nothing on his head, what kept David going was his faith in God. He never stopped relying on God, seeking the divine grace and praising the Lord. In God, David sought and found his strength and refuge and restoration. But that didn't mean he was immune to suffering, or that he avoided pain and agony and shame. He went from a decorated officer to a mere refugee. He had to humiliate and mortify himself just to survive. And after humiliating himself, just getting by, barely surviving, what was end of that trial was not a divine consolation. There was no great vision of the heaven splitting. He arrived in a cave in the middle of nowhere. He was too famous and considered too dangerous to seek refuge in neighboring nations. He was one of the most powerful generals who fought against those nations. He couldn't go back to his family in Israel because he was now wanted man there. And while he did have that sword of Goliath, it was something that he could sell because it was too famous of a sword. And sword as a tool is not really a useful thing. Knife maybe, but not a sword. And I picture myself in his shoes, and I think it is perfectly normal and fair for David to lose hope at this point. Lose hope and give up at that point. Psychologically, people are great at adapting at the upgrade of life. If you were suddenly just a snap of a finger, put a place in the shoes of a billionaire, you're going to adapt to that quite pretty quickly. But if you're suddenly if you go to some sort of a downfall of life and suddenly end up becoming a homeless, you're going to have a lot of time, you're going to struggle a lot just to accept that reality. Physiologically, psychologically, we are built to adapt in the improvement of life quickly, but not at the downgrade of life. For example, you guys all have phones. Now, I doubt that any of you are capable of memorizing phone numbers as much as we did back in the day. And let's say we take away all your phones, smartphones. You're all going to get cranky real fast. I mean, you might say, like, I do a digital detox every now and then, but then you do that in the knowledge that you will get your phones back later. have your phones taken away with no promise of getting it back, we're gonna get angry and feeling like stupid real fast. That's just how human psychology and physiology works. And now imagine, so it's we struggle a lot when we have tasted a higher level of life and then we then go downwards. Now imagine how David feels. He was a man of faith, yes. And even in such difficult times, he still turned to God. But he went from decorated general to a homeless refugee while he didn't do anything wrong. He was loyal to Saul. He had no plot. He was an innocent soldier. He was a hero who saved the nation from Goliath. But the world went cruel on him. The king that he was serving just went mad on him. This is life of faith in reality isn't easy. We go through similar stuff. We uphold higher codes. We try to be loyal. We try to be kind. We practice humility, and we tell ourselves to love our neighbors, but that is taken as a vulnerability to be taken advantage of. We go out into the world with bold and confidence, proclaiming God's justice and beauty. But when we come home, we do lament at the struggles we face. We do taste despair in our problems. And we struggle between the gap, the difference we clearly see between our proclamation in faith and the reality that we have to face. David, the beloved king of faith, also suffered and struggled with despair. Psalm 142 is the song that David wrote in that cave. It expresses this wrestle, the life of struggle where we live as people of faith in God, but we still face difficult realities, and and this shadow of doubt keeps on creeping on because there's so much gap between what we proclaim and confess with the reality that we face. Psalm 142 is not just a self-pity, it's also not giving into despair. And it's not a blind-eyed optimism. David never stopped believing in God, but the reality was cruel to him. He was lonely, he was in despair, he was deprived. And David's prayer in 142 is lamentation, where he poured out his sorrow, his despair, and loneliness to God. When we face injustice, hurt, pain, and sorrow and loneliness, this is how we are to heal. Not to shove it away, not to deny it, but we bring it to God and we pour it out. And we seek God's healing. The prayer for healing we see in Psalm 42 reveals how we ought to pray to God and how God intends to work his divine healing. It begins with the cry, the whole cry that addresses God. To the Lord I cry out, to the Lord I plead for mercy. I pour out my lament before him. I tell him about my troubles. It's not a doubt or a hate towards God. It's a faithful cry of a child who seeks refuge and comfort in the arms of his father. And then there's the confession or recognition of one's challenge. Christian healing is not escapism. We address the fact that strength is leaving. There's traps everywhere. No one cares for me. There's nowhere to run. But even in that, David speaks that faithful trust in God's companionship. In verse 3, even when my strength leaves me, you watch my footsteps. Now, there's that still gap between our faith and our reality. And we address that and we bring it to God, because Christian faith and Christian hope is not escapism. In verse 5 to 6, we clearly see David addressing this. How he says, how how he says, I call you my God, that you are my great reward and refuge. But look at me now. I'm in the cave, middle of nowhere. I'm alone. But even as we proclaim and confess that God is our shelter, our refuge, and our shepherd, our great reward, we also bring our struggles and realities and doubt to God. When you hold doubt, it's not something that you try to silence. It's something for you to bring to God, which will lead to the final request. Free me from prison so that I may give thanks to your name. When we seek God for help, we're not just seeking spiritual, conceptual, or philosophical alignment. God is the Lord of all. When we ask for God to help, we're asking for practical resolutions in the physical, material reality as well. And then something interesting happens at the end. Verse 7b, because of me, the godly will ascend, for you will vindicate me. Psalm 142 is David's personal lamentation. It was supposed to be about himself. But at the end of the prayer, David's voice shifts from being personal to a communal confession. In his prayer, we witness how God heals his life. Let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 22. When we seek God to help us and heal us, God works in a strange way. Instead of, he does. God, when we ask to be helped, God makes us helpers. When we ask to be healed, God tries to make God and pushes us to be healers. And this is where God's healing feels a bit confusing from time to time. I mean, when we ask God for help, our imagination leans to the impossible lucky jackpots, lotteries, or some Deus ex machina happening. Maybe someone famous and important and rich just coming in to save the day because they saw a vision or dream. I mean, that can happen. That does happen. And that's probably why David actually prayed, because of me, the godly will assemble. But instead of the godly, the wretched assemble. People who were poor, in trouble, people who owe someone money, people who were in debt or discontented, people who were oppressed by Saul, just like David, and had to leave the country. In verse 1, we see David running to Abdullah. His family came, and then these 400 wretched men just swarmed around his cave. 400. So this didn't all happen overnight. David asked God for help, and people are sending, God sent him people who need help from him. Day after day, he received not helpers, but people who need to be helped by him. And you might think, at least he had his family with him. All his family came, and it must be the grace of. No, it wasn't. This is a time before basic human rights or innocent of the proven guilty thing was established. This was a time of monarchy, and Saul was out to get David. Now imagine being David's family with the king's army out to get him. Now, at this point, if I was in David's shoes, I probably thought God finally abandoned me. In fact, I would kind of be angry at the fact that this happened. And I was innocent, David was innocent, the family was innocent, was loyal, we didn't want a hero, and yet the entire family got caught in this crossfire of spiritual battle between Saul the rebel and God, the King of Kings. I mean, he probably would have been perfectly happy being a shepherd. But David didn't resent God. He didn't doubt God. He didn't turn on God, complaining why he got involved in this game of thrones between Saul and God. He accepted the people who gathered around him and became their leader. He became the leader who serves and protects and helps. This is a strange thing. I mean, picture this. I'm in a financial trouble, so I ask God for help, and people who gather around that in their response to that prayer is people who also need financial aid. What is happening? But this is how God heals. When you ask to be helped, God will make you a helper. And in through Christ, we become what we ask from God: the help, the righteous, the servants and healers and warriors. Next slide, please. And after becoming this helper and leader of 400 men, David went to Moab. It seems that he wanted to secure his family in a safe location, particularly his parents. And as he entrusts his parents to the king of Moab, this is what he says: please take care of them until I know what God is going to do for me. In his faith and prayer, David was trusting God's plan and timing, Kairos over Chronos. David showed patience for God to reveal his answer. David faithfully waited for God to answer his lament, for God to deliver the wretched and the oppressed. And while David was being patient and waiting, he was continuing to tend the 400 wretched people, the people God entrusted for David to care and lead. When we seek God's help and restoration, we get impatient. That's natural. I get it. We all get it. And this impatience runs wild when God takes us to help others when we ask for help. No, like I said, I'm in financial trouble. I ask for God for help, and there's a beggar asking for help. And you know by instinct this is a sign, but it doesn't make sense in the head. Now, being a Christian, with our identity and integrity and dignity as a Christian individual, it enables us to help others while asking to be helped. But patience runs quickly because we're only human. It is difficult to read God's plan and timing unless God reveals it to us intentionally. It is written that God has made everything fit beautifully in its appropriate time. But he has also placed ignorance in the human heart so that people cannot discover what God has ordained from the beginning to the end of their lives. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. Here I ask, when you seek to be healed by God and feel that God is making you a healer instead, you must practice patience, a faithful patience, and do not mistake patience with idleness. When you ask God to heal, and God, for some reason, uses you as an instrument of healing of others, you have to realize that faithful patience is a busy practice. And after entrusting his family to King Moab, David was now in a stronghold in Moab land. It was a safe haven, much different from a cave. Okay, now we're finally getting somewhere. Cave was a hiding place, but it was an open and risky location. It's not really that defendable. In Psalm 142, David called it a prison, and you might think that caves kind of gives you a bit of a protection, but that's not really how it works. If a small troop can corner you to a cave, and I don't know, set things on fire, the heat and smoke will wipe out entire people, the entire troop. Now, unlike a cave, David was now in a stronghold where he could defend himself. It was a military jungle. This was his turf. He knew what to do here. Now, if anyone knew basic military political tactics among the 400 people that now followed David, they probably would recommend to take this stronghold as the headquarters of their revolt, or maybe start beginning of their new city-state. That's the tactical thing to do. They finally had the basic resources to defend and build a starting point. Well, guess what? Prophet Gad came along, told David to leave the stronghold and go back to the land of Judah, where they just ran away from. where Saul's army was everywhere out to hunt David and also the 400 men. What's peculiar here is that there's a lack of flair in this particular message. Gad the prophet was telling David to stand his ground within the land of Judah, but he says it very bluntly and simply. God didn't even say that this is a message from God. Like if a prophet comes up, says, "You shall go back to the land of Judah and stand your ground. This is the word of the Lord," then you go. No doubt about it. But that's not how this is what's happening. Basically, I was just having a financial trouble, and Victor came up along and pointed to the beggar where I probably shouldn't even approach. Says, "You should go help the guy. I am broke." And then the minister says, "I should go help the guy." There's no trumpet, there's no thunder, there's no flare, like cosmic flare to authenticate this message. It's a simple advice of a prophet, of a minister. It sounds impractical, it's unrealistic, and it's idealistic advice that points towards God's vision. The voice of the prophet, ministers and preachers. The voice that encourages you to trust God in God's word and plan and timing. That's what you need to trust. Prophet Gad told David to leave his safe haven, his stronghold, to enter the land of Judah where God called, the land of wilderness and danger. Just as how ministers and priests of today advise humility, meekness, generosity, temperance, innocence, virtue, patience, and integrity. All the impractical advantages in a modern worldly ways. But as David chose to follow God's vision, the advice of a prophet over what seems tactically sensible, working towards God's vision over his immediate safety, you must heed the words of God's prophet. You must heed to the advice of the ministers and mentors, Christian mentors. This is how God restores you. When you seek God's help, God will send those for you to help. When you seek God's timing in faithful and diligently working patience, God's messenger will tell you to do the right thing. There, you listen. You listen to that unrealistic and impractical call to danger and righteousness. Read ahead into 1 Samuel chapter 23 later, and you will see that David and the 400 men, the wretched refugees who needed help for themselves, become liberators. There was a people of Keilah being attacked by the Philistines again. And David and the 400 men, the wretched, the poor, the refugee, outside, the hated, became the deliverers and saviors and liberators, their fellow Israelites. Seek God for help. God will make you the helper sent to the world. Seek God to be healed, and he will make you a healer. Before you even realize your existence, your ontological position will shift from someone who needs help, someone who is deprived and feeling. Before you even realize that you will become someone who's already filled and flowing. This is how God heals. And I praise the Lord. Thanks be to God.